looking forward to presenting to you today. And so why don't we just start off? Today's webinar is going to be focusing on updates of some of the research that TURI's been doing over the past several years, specifically focused on safer products and processes. And we've got a lot of really interesting information to share with you. So it's going to be a very full set of content, and we will be leaving some time at the end for questions, and you can always use the chat for Q&A as well if you have any questions. So this is just in general the agenda. We're going to share with you information about safer alternatives to solvents that are used in plumbing and painting applications. We're going to hear a little bit of an update on the hexavalent chromium-free coatings research that TURI has been doing over the past many years with the aerospace and defense industry. In fact, it's kind of wrapping up now. So it's really interesting information. We're going to learn some more about safer alternatives to PFAS in products, and we've been doing a lot of different research on that. And then finally, we're going to hear about industrial surface cleaning technologies and processes that can help companies move away from their use of halogenated solvents. So as a reminder, I know we have many people joining us today who are not toxics use reduction planners. So I just wanted to do a very high level overview of what toxics use reduction is. And essentially it is source reduction that is focused on how can we reduce our use of chemicals. It's very much focused on the use of the chemicals, not on what might be emitted into the environment. So very upstream approach to managing chemicals and the potential for pollution. We focus on the inherent hazard of chemicals. We, as planners in Massachusetts, are very careful to identify a very full suite of opportunities to eliminate the use of those chemicals or to reduce the hazard within the workplace. And the toxics use reduction plan implementation really depends on whether or not a company determines that implementation is affordable and effective, if the opportunities will be both those things, as well as safer. And one of our speakers will talk a little bit more about one of the benefits of this prevention approach, which is that remediation can be significantly more expensive than prevention. And PFAS is an example of that. And so Gabrielle will be talking some more about that, which will be interesting. So toxics use reduction and alternatives assessment have very complementary goals. And that really is to identify alternatives that can be used as substitutes to replace chemicals of high concern. In toxics use reduction, we recognize that complete elimination of a toxic chemical may not be feasible initially, and so reduction is a very valid approach. But we are always, in both toxics use reduction and alternatives assessment, we're looking for, is the alternative we're considering safer? Is it effective? Is it going to give companies what they need? And is it affordable? Without those three elements, it's very hard to expect implementation. And so in the Toxics Use Reduction Institute, we provide services to help companies to be successful in implementing safer alternatives. We do that in the laboratory by really looking at toxic chemicals and their relative hazard, their technical feasibility and cost. There's a lot of very hands-on work that happens from TURI, in particular the lab, in helping companies to implement. We also offer grants to support companies in researching options to their use of toxic chemicals, evaluating whether they're safer, and then really supporting them in adoption. We use a tool here at TURI that was developed at TURI called the Pollution Prevention Options Analysis System, or P2OASIS. And it is a tool that is designed to help you think about very specific categories of concern that might be associated both with a chemical or with a process alternative. And so it is a tool that you will see referenced, and we encourage you to go to our website here if you're interested in learning a bit more about that tool. So I'm already over time. What I want to do is introduce our speakers very briefly, and then I'll hand it over to Greg. So we're going to start off with Dr. Greg Morose, who is TURI's research director here at the Institute. He has been instrumental in some really innovative research over the past decades, and he just continues to do really cool research. So I'm hoping that you will be as excited about what he has to talk about as I am. We have Gabrielle Salerno, who is TURI's green chemist and been with us for a couple of years now, and Dr. Salerno is also one of these people who just is so passionate about finding safer alternatives. So he's going to talk about a lot of the research that he's been involved in, looking at alternatives to the use of PFAS in products. And then finally, we'll hear from somebody who I think many people here know, Dr. Jason Marshall, who is the TURI lab director and a bit of a character. He and I have we like to banter, so you'll have to excuse us there, but he has been with the Institute forever. Is that right, Jason? So has really deep knowledge about where the opportunities lie. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and invite Greg to go ahead and share your screen and take it away. And thank you all again for joining us. That looks good, Greg.
Okay, good. Thank you for the introduction, Pam, and thank you all for joining us for this webinar. And I'm going to be talking about some research that TURI is doing to identify safer products for two different product categories. One is paint strippers and one is PVC cement. So first, I just want to make sure everyone knows what we mean by these product categories. Hold on one sec. There we go. So first is PVC cement and primers. So some of you that may have done some home projects might be familiar with this product. When you have PVC pipe that's used for drainage or other purposes, and you need to make repairs to it or join separate lengths of pipe or couplings, then you would use PVC cement to do that. And first you would put a primer on, and that's usually the purple primer. You might have seen the purple primer on these pipes. And then after you put the primer on, you put the actual PVC cement on, and then you join the pipes together and they adhere to each other. So it's called a cement instead of an adhesive because it actually dissolves the PVC to a certain extent, and it binds them together to make a much stronger joint. So that's the PVC cement. The next one is paint strippers. And we're talking about chemical paint strippers. There are other types such as heat guns or sanding or other ways to remove paints and coatings, but we're going to be talking about chemical-based paint strippers. So what you do is you pour the paint stripper liquid onto the surface of what you're trying to strip. So it could be a door, it could be a piece of furniture, or whatever you're trying to remove the surface coating. And then you use a brush to spread it across the surface and let it sit for a certain amount of dwell time. Depending upon the product, they have different times before they work. And then you would scrape off the coating with a plastic putty knife or some other tool to remove that. So that's That's what we mean by paint strippers. And they're used by both professionals, painters in the industry, as well as people that are doing it themselves and going to Home Depot and buying these things and applying it to their furniture at their houses. So the issue is many of these products contain chemicals of high concern. So I've thrown a couple of examples up here. So we have, if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, common paint stripper they have is a clean strip, and it contains several chemicals of high concern, ethylbenzene, methanol, and xylene. If you need to strip paint off a boat, you go to a like West Marine store, you could get like Aqua Strip, and that contains NMP. So it's another highly toxic chemical. And a lot of professional users use this Benco B7, which contains methylene chloride and methanol. This is not available for do-it-yourselfers, but professionals can still access this product for at least a few more months until the EPA rule kicks in. So it'll affect professional users as well. On the PVC cement side, there's not as wide a variety of toxic chemicals used. It's pretty much tetrahydrofuran or THF, and that's used widely in both the PVC cement and the PVC primer. And it's been used for about 70 years in these products, so it's pretty much the industry standard. It's hard to find any alternatives that don't have that. So those are the chemicals that we're really targeting. And THF, that's something that's been determined by IARC, which is International Agency on Research. For cancer, they have determined that THF is a carcinogen, and now these products require a Prop 65 label, and they also require a GHS pictogram with the exploding chest to indicate there is a long-term chronic health concern with using these products. And so we tried to do a quick scope of how many people use these things, and based upon information provided by EPA and other sources, between the professional painters and plumbers that use these products, students in trade schools that use these products, and do-it-yourselfers that go to Home Depot and Lowe's to use these products, we estimate there's 3.6 million users of these products every year in the United States. So yes, these products contain these chemicals of high concern. So the other piece of the puzzle is what's the potential exposure? And there is a great potential for exposure for these chemicals in these products because these are solvents, and many of them are volatile and evaporate rapidly. So we're seeing potential exposure throughout the life cycle of these products. So we're seeing it starting with manufacturing operations, the workers that are in these manufacturers that make these products. So there's potential exposure during the mixing and the container filling operations, because typically they're not enclosed. Also, once the products are made and they're transported, there's potential for spills and leaks during the transportation process. And then the one that's of most concern is during the use phase for these products. So when you remember when I showed those pictures earlier on how they're used, you're basically using them in an environment where there's often no great ventilation source, and these evaporate rapidly. So there's a high potential that you're going to have these solvents within your breathing zone during the use of the products. And then finally, at the end, is also concerns with improper disposal at the end of life of these products. So we applied to the EPA to fund a project to address these products of concern and the ingredients in them. And so we got a grant last year to start working on finding and promoting and getting the industry to adopt safer alternatives for these product categories. And EPA is pretty excited about it because it's a voluntary model. So there's no regulatory requirement that companies can't use THF or use THF in PVC cement products. And most of those chemicals are high concern in paint strippers. There's no regulatory requirement. So companies are meeting the letter of the law with those products. But, as I mentioned, there's a lot of concern with the hazard of these chemicals and the potential exposure. So this grant that we received, it's really trying a voluntary model to get all these actors. So there's the unions. So the plumbers union and the painters union are very interested in a safer work environment for their members. There's the manufacturers of these products, and there's the retailers that sell these products. So we're trying to get these different stakeholders working together to really transition to safer ingredients for these product categories. So the process is, first, we need to work with the manufacturers to get them to switch to safer chemistries. So a couple of barriers that typically these manufacturers have, they're usually smaller companies that produce these products, and they might not have the technical expertise to do a reformulation of the products, and there might be some financial costs associated with these transitions. So as part of this grant, we provide free technical assistance to reformulate products, and we also have financial assistance to cover costs of these transition. So, to help them with the R&D costs, to pay for initial scale-up manufacturing batch, or if they need any special equipment because of the new ingredients, those type of things. And also, a lot of these products need to be tested and certified by independent certification agencies. So there's a cost of that to bring new products to market and commercialize them. So we have funding available to help the manufacturers with these technical and financial barriers. So we're also doing helping with the performance testing of these products to validate that they work comparable to the products that contain the hazardous components. And we're also helping companies, with reviewing the ingredients to make sure that the ingredients that they're switching to are not equally problematic or have other issues. And then there's a big education and awareness component to this as well, is to get the results that we're coming up with out to the retailers, out to the unions, and out to the product users, so that they're aware of these issues and aware of the safer alternatives that are available or will be available. So for the product manufacturers, here's a list. So we've got about 10 plus significant manufacturers of the PVC cement products. And for the paint strippers, there's about 8 major manufacturers of the paint stripper products. So they're kind of located throughout the country. So we've been reaching out to each one of these individually to get them to participate in this program. We've had various levels of success. Some don't even respond, and some we are having pretty close and tight collaborations in making this happen. So kind of have the whole spectrum of responses at this point. We're also working with labor unions. So first one is IUPAT, which is the International Painters Union, and they currently have about 140,000 members in the US in that union. And they're very interested in this work. And I presented at their annual health and safety conference last year, and they were really appreciative of this work that we're doing and really are interested in the results, and are willing to help us in any way possible. The second union is it's called UA for short, but it's basically the United Association of Plumbers across the country, and they have 365,000 members. And then we also there's an umbrella union called NABTU, which is the North American Building Trades Union, and that covers all the different types of construction-related professions. And they have over 3 million members, and they have a research arm called the Center for Construction Research and Training that's involved with how to do research to make a safer environment for the workers in all construction trades. So we have them as well that are working with us. So as far as affected retailers, we're dealing with online retailers such as Amazon and Grainger, and we're also dealing with the physical stores. So most of these physical stores also have an online presence, like Walmart. You can go to the store, or you can buy stuff online. Same with most of these other stores. So some, the big ones are, from a retail standpoint, are like Home Depot and Lowe's and True Value. You've probably heard of those. But there's a lot of specialty stores that sell just plumbing or paint equipment. And so that's like Ferguson is an example of that. It's probably something you would never heard of unless you're a plumber. But they're a big player in this, and they distribute a lot of products. So we're trying to include the professional stores as well as the retail stores in our efforts. And this is just a photo of the bay at Home Depot that contains paint strippers and coating removal products. So you can see there's a lot of products out there. And you can see the middle row is the clean strip product, which I showed earlier on the first slide. So what we're seeing is this work that we're doing aligns well with a lot of these retailers have safer chemical policies or strategies or goals. In general, they are receptive to this type of work because they do want to provide safer products for their consumers. So that works out well, and hopefully we can leverage that. So as part of this project, the EPA asked us to do an initial inventory of what's out there for products. So we went out to all the different physical stores, and we had to measure the shelf space for the different product categories. And then, so once you know how much one product shelf space is taken at the store, then you find out how many stores they have across the country, and then you multiply it by that number of stores. So then you come up with a total amount of linear feet of shelf space. So for PVC cement products, the total feet of shelf space is 171,000 feet, which is 32 miles. So it's like 32 miles of retail space for these PVC cement products across the country. And then what we wanted to do is find out how many of those products contain chemicals of concern and how many do not, how many products are free of these chemicals of concern. So for the PVC cement, we found that 96% contain the chemicals of concern, which is basically the tetrahydrofuran. and only 4% did not. So the goal of our project is to really get those numbers to really change dramatically. So we'll do an inventory at the end of the project, and hopefully we'll have much better numbers for the safer products. We did something similar for paint strippers, and for the paint strippers, we had 29 miles of retail shelf space across the country. But the number with chemicals of concern was 49%, and it was about 51% for either no chemical of concern or we couldn't determine. So if it's a question mark, it means their SDS either said trade secret or proprietary ingredient, or there was no SDS available. So in that case, it was 15% of the products we really couldn't get an answer on. So the percentages for the chemicals of high concern is a little lower here, because in paint strippers, there's two types of paint strippers. There's like fast acting and slow acting. So the slow acting ones typically don't have chemicals of high concern, but the fast acting ones do. So if I bifurcated this just for the fast acting ones, it would probably be up in the 90+ percentile for the fast acting ones that have chemicals of high concern. So what we want to do is we want to do green chemistry, and we don't want to do regrettable substitution. So we want to make sure the ingredients that these companies move to are safer. So we're using the green screen as the way to, this is like a chemical hazard assessment methodology, and basically puts all chemicals into one of 4 buckets, 4 benchmark levels. So the ones that fall in benchmark 1 are the chemicals of high concern and should be avoided. And the ones that are in 2, 3, or 4 are the ones considered safer and the ones we want to move towards. Whoop. So, so some of the, just a quick highlight of some of the things we're doing to advance the safer products adoption in the marketplace. We have been working with training centers for the unions to get them to use the safer products in their for their apprentice training. So we've already done that across 5 different states, and we're also starting to work with regional vocational high schools to get them to switch to using the safer products so that they can use those for their students. As far as working with manufacturers, we are working with several manufacturers, and this is just a recent article that came out with Weldon, which is the largest PVC cement manufacturer in the world. They actually invented PVC cement back in the 1950s. So they've been the leader for 75 years. And we've been working with them to get the THF or tetrahydrofuran out of their product portfolio. So it's been eliminated for a couple of their products, and we're trying to get it across more of the products. So ultimately get their whole product portfolio free of THF. So we meet every 2 weeks and go over the progress of the testing and reformulation and so forth. So it's been a very successful collaboration. It's kind of what we envisioned when we took on this project. So it's good to see it's really happening. The National Painters Union is helping us do performance testing with the safer products as compared to the ones with the toxic chemicals. And we're doing these tests according to ASTM standards. And we're doing it with the union members so that there's a high confidence that we're getting good results. So when we publish the results of the different products and how they work as paint strippers, we're going to use this work that they're doing. It's actually a facility in Brentwood, New Hampshire, that their training center is where we're doing all this testing. And we're going to publish the results of all these tests. And we're also doing field trials. So just a couple of examples. And here in Massachusetts, outstanding bath, because these paint strippers are used a lot for bathtub stripping. They created some test panels for us with real coatings that they use on bathtubs. So we're able to do testing on real samples. We've gone to Belcastro Furniture Refinishing in Massachusetts to do some side-by-side testing with safer alternatives and the ones with chemicals of high concern. And also working with Raytheon because they use toxic paint strippers to strip off chemical agent resistant coatings, which is basically like the camouflage coating that you see on military equipment. So it's really heavy duty coating to stop chemical attacks. So, but they do have to replace it every now and then. So we're trying to work with them to find a safer alternative than using their methylene chloride to remove those coatings. So the goal is, with all this information that we're pulling together, is to share it to all the affected stakeholders and users of these products. We've already got a fact sheet out for the PVC cement, and we're working on a fact sheet for the paint stripper products. Really, education and awareness is a really huge part of this effort. So for next steps, just continuing to work with the product manufacturers to make these changes. As I mentioned, do the fact sheet on the paint strippers. The EPA is also trying to develop a retailer recognition program for selling safer products. So that will be another motivator for retailers to make this change. And also we're doing more outreach to the retailers, and we're trying to plan a retailer summit maybe in January, still in the planning stage, but we'd like to get all the retailers together that sell these products and be able to educate them with the safer alternatives and options available. So I just have a few minutes left. I'm just going to talk about another project that TURI has been working on for over a decade, and that is trying to get hexavalent chromium out of coatings for the aerospace industry. So this shows a stack up of typically where hexchrome is applied. So hexchrome provides corrosion resistance for coatings. So it's extremely important for aerospace and the military to make sure their precious, expensive equipment does not rust. So it's typically 3 layers, so there's a top coat layer, but that doesn't have any hexchrome, but then below it is a primer, sealant, and conversion coating. So we're trying to get all those coating layers to not have hexchrome. So we started with the sealants. That was the first phase back in 2012 to 2014, found safer alternatives without hexchrome. Then we did bond primers, and we did that from 2015 to 2017. And now we're working on conversion coatings. And conversion coatings is the toughest one because it's the last coating. So in the whole coating layer stack up, it's the last one that has hexchrome. So there's a lot of resistance to move away from it because everybody loves hexchrome for corrosion resistance. So you really need a lot of confidence to do that. So so for conversion coatings, we've done a significant amount of testing, and we've coordinated with a bunch of collaborators. So Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company, space company, they provided the space test panels for us. Textron Aviation provided other panels. We did apply the conversion coatings at Polymetal here in Massachusetts, as well as 2 other locations across the country. We put the primer and top coat, was done here in Mass by CIL. And then we did a lot of the testing was done by Lockheed Martin down in Texas for paint adhesion and for short-term corrosion testing. And then we had funding to support all this from Raytheon and Boeing. And so far, we've got SocoSurf as a product that's performing comparable to the Hexchrome panels. And what we're doing right now is we're doing long-term corrosion testing on these, because it did well on the short-term corrosion testing, but many of the manufacturers want to get the long-term results. So to do that, NASA has a beachside corrosion test facility down at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So the panels that we use for this are down there being exposed to ambient salt environment from the marine environment there. And we started it in September 2020. So now we'll get our 5-year results in October of 2025. So we're really excited about that. So far, the interim results look really promising, but the 5-year results is what a lot of the companies want to see. So we'll be having those results and sharing those results soon. So I think that's it for my presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Greg, so much. Gabrielle, if you could go ahead and share your screen. So you'll notice in the chat, Agnes posted a link to the fact sheet that Greg had mentioned about the PVC cement project. So encourage people to take a look at that. And we will have contact information for everybody at the end of this webinar. So Gabrielle, go ahead and take it away.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So following up, I want to share with you our work trying to find PFAS replacements, and I would like to start with the why we're concerned about PFAS quickly. You all know that PFAS are these forever chemicals that resist breakdown, persist environment, and accumulates in our bodies for years, and that leads to some health concerns, and it has been found links to cancer, immune disorders, developmental issues for some of the PFAS. And not only that, also PFAS pollution is very costly. We have losses for public health, like up to 62 billions for healthcare loss productivity directly linked to PFAS. That's twice the market value of PFAS globally. We have remediation costs that globally also are up to trillions, stuff that cannot be repaid, and technologies are not ready to address all the PFAS. So that's why lately we've been having a rather hard focus on trying to find PFAS alternatives for many applications. So I'm going to speak about our work with Transcend, our work with HARS corporations, and our work with UMass Lowell that also are across this work with this corporation. Is a cross collaboration across all of us. So the first one is the work with Transcend. Transcend is a Massachusetts-based company that supplies chemicals. One of their market lines are etchants, and photoresist and dielectrics for electronics and aerospace. And they found that a major PFAS manufacturer was exiting the market. So they were about to get running out of some chemicals for one of the many steps in semiconductor manufacturing called etching, this step number 5 here. And they wanted to find an alternative. And that alternative has to have certain compatibility with chemical compatibility with the etching solution, have some performance regarding reducing surface tension. And since we are finding an alternative, why not be safer? And then it has to be stable for more than 1 year. And work with Dr. Ram's group at UMass Lowell in collaboration with Transcend and their TURI research grant. They could successfully find alternatives for all of the working conditions they were looking for. And this work took less than a year. it led to a very interesting and very leading cutting-edge article. And not only that, it has a direct impact, an immediate impact in the market. Most of the customers of Transcend shift quickly to the new products. This new product was 30 times more cheaper than the PFAS incumbent. So yeah, that's very engaging, and it was a super successful case study. And I cannot emphasize more than with focus mindset, one can find the right alternative for the right application. We also work with the UMass Lowell Plastic Engineering Department researchers to find stain-resistant coatings for textiles. There is a very interesting article that came out from that research grant that on cotton textiles for stain resistant, meaning waterproof and oil-proof at the same time. And PFAS is very good at that, but that's not the only chemistry ever available. So again, if you think hard, if you work with a focus, and it doesn't require thousands of years or millions of dollars. Sometimes with a small TURI grant and a focus work with smart people like Bahare here, that she's going to speak about that, we can find alternatives. And we translated that success to, we wanted to translate that success to acrylic fabrics in collaboration with Hertz. And now I'm going to give the stage to Bahare to speak about her experience working with TURI.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to share my experience working with TURI on developing PFAS-free coatings for textiles. And I would like to talk about the research journey, the role of TURI support, and also the outcomes that were made possible through this collaboration. So I would not talk about the PFAS because Gabriel mentioned, the issues, the toxicity issues that we have with PFAS. But one of the most applications or commonly applications in many textile is water and oil repellency, from everyday sun repellent fabrics to specialized automotive uses, like for example the convertible car tops. And because PFAS has, excellent water and oil repellency, they have been used in like these applications. But as you know, they persist in environment and raise health concern and issues. So with regulations, industry now really needs safer alternatives. And Hertz, who was our industry partner, is a supplier of coated fabrics and textiles used in automotive interiors, convertible car tops, and also military application. So they are a leader in their field, but like many companies, they are under pressure to move away from PFAS. And their challenge was finding a PFAS-free solution that is not only effective, but also scalable and cost-effective, so it can be applied across, their large production volumes. Next one, please, Gabriel. So as our research journey in this project, we tested more than 5 different chemistries focusing on bio-derived and non-fluorinated compounds. In total, we carried out over 200 lab-scale coating trials to optimize the process for both water and oil repellency. We tested, we failed, refined, and we tested again until, the coating reached the best and the highest performance that, we expected. And Hertz, our industry partner, supported us by providing commercial fabrics and industry performance benchmark, which make it possible to, evaluate the coatings on the real world conditions, not just in the lab scale. Next one, please. So TURI definitely played a key role in this project. From the beginning, their feedback helped us frame the research around safer chemistry principles, not just the performance. Their funding support gave me the opportunity to carry out 2 full academic years of learning, testing, and formulation development, and which was critical for making progress. And TURI also performed the P2 Oasis hazard analysis. As you can see, here in this, like the different colors, low, medium, high, and very high, which help us, identifying the risk to avoid regretful choices, because our goal was to find a safer or solve the problem without creating a new one. And most importantly, they connected us with HARS, ensuring that the research was not only academic, but directly relevant to real industry applications and also expectations. So for me as a researcher, working with TURI has been a really unique experience. The monthly check-ins weren't just meetings. They gave us, very good feedbacks and also guidance, and kept us moving in the right direction. I was able to, take what I learned in like the safe chemical assessment in my formulations to, apply it to, whatever we wanted to try. And I also had the opportunity to visit HARTS and see how our work translated into real world testing, which was incredibly motivating. And on top of that, TURI encouraged us to, share part of our work in conferences with others, even helping me organize a student workshop on PFAS. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Yeah, really, that's fine. So here I would like to mention a brief, achievements of this work. First of all, the water repellency, we got the contact angle above 150, which is considered as super hydrophobic, and it was comparable to PFAS coatings. For oil repellency, because it is more challenging compared to the water repellency, we were able to get grade 1 according to AATCC 118 standard, which is the first solution that has been tried without any fluorinated compounds. And as we are talking about fabrics, durability is so important. So we tested our samples for both water and for both wash durability and abrasion cycles. And we observed that it maintained over 90% of the repellency after 10 accelerated wash cycles and after, 1,000 abrasion cycles. And we have also tested our samples at HARS after, all those lab scale characterizations. We tested our samples at HARS. And if you play the video, Gabriel, please.
Oh,
So,
it's
okay,
it's
no
a
worries.
PDF.
No worries. But it's like even outperform the PFAS-based coding in Bundesman test, which is more aggressive than, what we have tried in the lab scale. So the outcomes of this project have been meaningful for both industry and my own growth as a researcher. The industrial impact, we were able, to have a PFAS-free solution that is scalable and low cost compared to what HARTS is using currently, which is called MPEL technology. Our solution was bio-derived and water-based, so it was safer and more sustainable. And it was not only for convertible car tops, it can also be used for military applications as well without sacrificing the performance. And as a researcher, this project opened valuable opportunities like 3 conference presentations, 1 publication in Progress in Organic Coatings, 1 patent which is currently under review, and 1 manuscript draft that right now we are, in the preparation stage. So these outcomes reflect both the scientific and industrial impact of the work, which is because of the strong support from TURI and HARTS that made it possible.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And this is so far, this is a success so far on the career of Bahare that didn't even finish the PhD, and she's breaking, groundbreaking discoveries and developments.
Thank you.
So yeah, sure. I mean, thank you. Other lines of work that we are working is a PFAS-free option for food packaging. Thankfully, there are alternatives readily available, making the EU and FDA full ban for coatings for packaging, food contact packaging feasible. However, we can discuss, like the safety of those. Many imply microplastics and stuff, but basically there are two approaches to achieve a combined water and oil fat repellency. Our focus was mostly on paper. One is dual layer, a hydrophobic material on top of oleophobic material, or vice versa. So we have to coat the surface twice, or one coating providing both waterproof and oil-proof again. So we can do like a hydrophilic biopolymer and enhancing hydrophobicity, or vice versa. What we've been doing at TURI was we started with a dual layer coating on craft paper that we optimize a bi-layer optimization involving wax and hydrophilic biopolymer, and we could find that at least for the optimized formulation, the performance is comparable to commercial food wraps, and we've been conducting some formulation optimization with UML researchers under a recent research grant. Also, we've been digging into alternatives for refrigerants. Now there is a lot of changes in refrigeration because well, in the 80s, 90s, they wanted to move away from ozone depletion substances. Now they want to, on top of that, get away from greenhouse gases or high global warming potential gases. So there is a lot of need for finding low global warming potential alternatives to the incumbent F gases. And in April, we had a webinar about that, showcasing the alternative assessment report. I've been presenting the highlights of the report. We had the pleasure to have Professor Dr. Ian Cousin from Stockholm University to talk about the dangers of PFAS, and Morgan Banzo from the North American Sustainable Refrigeration Council to speak about some implementations in real life of safer refrigerants, non-fluorinated. I'm leaving the links in the chat. And we found out that there is a new generation of F gases called hydrofluorolefins. People are, fighting against each other on whether or not considering it PFAS. If you ask OECD countries, they are going to say yes. If you ask most people at EPA, they will say no. But that is a little bit of a distracting, I would say, in my opinion, a distracting conversation, because we had to see the entire life cycle of a refrigerant. In the case of F-gas manufacturing in general, HFO manufacturing in particular, they use CMR precursors, and this can be extended to PFAS because HFOs are not only used for refrigerants now, but also as input material for making other PFAS. And that, from a report from EPA, there's a correlation, a geographical correlation between the facilities, the location of the facilities, and increased cancer risk and other health problems. So that's one part. At the cradle, we have some problems there. At the utilization phase, we have other problems like HFOs imply the use of HFCs because it seems that HFOs are flammable. So for many applications where flammability is important, HFOs need to be mixed with HFCs to reduce the flammability. So we are not phasing out, the HFCs in that case. And there are other reports that they are reporting polymerization during use. So these HFOs become other PFAS out of nowhere, and we don't know who they are, those PFAS. So that's concerning. And then once these HFOs are released into the environment, they mostly form trifluoroacetic acid, which is an increasing concern because we are already exposed over threshold globally, because TFA, although it is a little bit less toxic than one can say PFOA and PFOS, which are the most prominent PFAS and the PFAS that generate the problems back in the time of dark waters and all the big litigations. We are exposed over threshold to TFA through tea, beer, orange juice, apple juice, because it is, the plants uptake and accumulate in watery fruits like oranges and stuff like that, and grains. So it's important to really reduce the use of TFA precursors like HFOs. On the other hand, non-F gases have appropriate market readiness. Maybe back in the 90s again with the ozone hole and stuff like that, some technologies were not ready enough to be competitive against F gases, but now we have wider adoption, payback periods that are super decent, and there are implementations for automotive air conditioning, domestic refrigeration, large factories, and even there are some technologies that are emerging that are solid state technologies, Peltier, magnetocaloric, that they are increasingly being market ready. Those are refrigerant free. So there are a lot of options. So we don't need to go to the path again to the next generation of fluorinated acid. We can be independent of fluorinated acids. We have other work that we've been doing with businesses and communities, our work on solvents, that Jason is going to talk about a lot, could impact there are some solvents that might involve PFAS. For example, trans DCE has a component that's a PFAS to mitigate the flammability. The famous flashpoint inerted trans DCE contains PFAS, so means PFAS too. So if we can find an alternative to those type of solvents, we are automatically phasing out PFAS too. We were working with firefighters to training to identify PFAS, PFAS dangers, PFAS hazards, and trying to find alternatives for their proof for the gear, and also on artificial turf. We also been working with the UML Department of Physics and Applied Physics to develop a very, very rare technique called particle-induced gamma emission, or PIGGY, that is being implemented in very, very few places in the world. And it has very low limit of detection, and it's a total fluorine detection. So it's a nuclear technique that generate gamma rays that are characteristic to fluorine, and that gamma rays are, or the sensors are very sensitive to those gamma rays, so we can go for limit of detections even lower than 10 ppm in some cases, and it's a proxy for PFAS. So if you have a large group of samples, let's say for, I don't know, a filter, water sample that pass through a filter, so you can accumulate those fluorines there, atoms, and you want to to check if it is worth further PFAS analysis. Then Piggy, as a proxy for PFAS, can tell you it makes sense to go through a more expensive and a more laborious technique or work or not for detection. And finally, I would like to mention, I am so proud of this, you know, the EU got inspired by the work at TURI, by the TURI model, and they approved a budget of 1.5 million euros, a pilot project for replicate the TURI model in their EU substitution centers, and they are going to be doing the innovation support that we are doing here, but in Europe, focus on batteries, hard chrome plating, and paint manufacturing in this tender, this pilot. So yeah, that's ongoing. We are super happy about that. With that, basically PFAS-free innovation is safer, smarter, and economically superior, as we been saying here. So thank you very much, everyone, and I'm open for questions later. So
thanks so much, Gabriel and Bahara. Really interesting, quick overview of a lot of research into alternatives to PFAS. So Jason, take it away.
All right. So
We're seeing your presenter mode, not the big screen.
why did it do that? Let's try again. How's that?
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Take two. So I was asked to talk about our upcoming project on vacuum vapor degreasing for alternatives to TCE. And so you already heard from a couple of my colleagues that work on research projects here with Gabriel and Greg, but I also wanted to let you know that there's more people who work on this behind the scenes. There's Alicia McCarthy, Amelia Wagner, and Alex Simcoe. All have worked in the field extensively with companies helping find safer cleaning alternatives and changing performance as well. So why are we talking about TCE? So if EPA goes through with their on again, off again plans for banning TCE, you know, we're historically been working with companies to replace TCE for different applications. Our success has been based on process-specific testing around these P2 projects. But as we asymptotically, you know, approach the TCE being to zero, you know, we have to look at why are these companies still left. We've obviously gotten rid of all the low-hanging fruit. Now we had to take a deep dive into who these companies and why are they still using TCE. And so we found that many of these companies are essentially stuck with using the vapor degreasing option. And so we have to find ways to help these companies eliminate that use. And so we actually had a two-pronged approach that we were hoping to take, and we submitted grants to EPA, and were originally selected to receive funding for both of them. One of them was around to provide incentive money to companies to help with the purchase cost. And the other one that is eventually going to be funded is around creating a vacuum vapor cleaning hub. And so the nature behind this is so we're going to be working with companies or P2 providers in New England and training them. Did my screen just stop on you guys?
Yeah, we can see your team screen.
Wow, that was weird. Everything just stopped.
Everything just stopped.
Yeah.
How
about now?
There you go. We got your benchtop testing.
Oh, that's the end of the slide. And
well, let's go further up then. Thank you.
All right. So if I could speak in reverse, I would have done that.
No, we're good. Really, it's fine. Yeah. There you go.
All right. So we're partnering with pollution prevention throughout New England to train them on what we've done here in Massachusetts and helping companies, you know, going on site, collecting materials, bringing them to the lab and do testing. But we're going to work with companies to do performance testing with them as well. So why did we end up going with the vacuum vapor degreasing hub? Well, as you can imagine, there are many forms of manufacturing in Massachusetts and in New England, lots of different materials, lots of different soils. Even within a specific location, one facility may do multiple types of metals, multiple types of soils. And so we had to basically find something that's going to work for everything. So that's what these companies are still using this, because they can't find something that's going to be universal and work for everything they're trying to do. And so this process is not very easy. And so in working with these companies and finding out why they're still using TCE in a vapor degreasing system is because they haven't had someone validate these alternatives for their specific application, and they don't have the time and the expertise themselves to go out and do this without any additional help. And so with the recent improvements around safety, around vacuum vapor degreasing, we decided that this may be a perfect opportunity to see what was out there and if this would be helpful for companies to find out if this would work for them. And so we did some looking around, and we found several manufacturers that are out there that develop vacuum vapor degreasing systems that would use solvents and produce cleaning for a wide range of applications. And so part of the grant, so this is the process that they would use. You have your cleaning chamber. Let me see if you can see my mouse down in here. You have the solvent being fed in there, and then clean off the base soils, and then come through and do a rinse. And this is a closed loop cycle where the only discharge that's coming out from the system is any of the waste oil removed from the parts. And so the solvents are used in there for a long period of time and usually don't have to be replenished often. So we're hoping that through the vapor degreasing hub that we can demonstrate the effectiveness of TCE-free cleaning process by first conducting basic testing to show the proof of concept that yes, this would work on these types of soils, and then diving into the more process-specific soils to make sure that they would work for each of these companies who are looking to replace the degreasing system. And when partnering with these companies, we're hoping to take the results that they get and sharing this with their peers to show that this is possible and that it can be done without using TCE. In addition to looking at how well things work, we're also responsible to help find safer chemistries as well, making sure we're not doing regrettable substitutions. You've heard us talk about P2 Oasis. This is kind of a snapshot of the first two columns are the main two modified alcohols that are being used in the market right now for vacuum vapor degreasing. And the next two are the main components of each of those two chemistries. And this is a comparison to TCE and N-propyl bromide. So quickly looking at the color coding, you can see less red is better. And so the modified alcohols look like they should be a potential safer option for people to go for and use. So as I mentioned, we've been working with a lot of the manufacturers of the vapor degreasing systems. So we have a lot of potential pathways to connect companies with. We're actively looking at the purchase cost of this as well as the operating requirements and seeing what kind of savings and benefits you can get from this. And also we're looking to provide this testing in a way that doesn't interrupt manufacturing of these companies. Many times they don't have the time to be able to designate and take things offline to try out new chemistry, so they have to kind of go forward and have someone else help them with this. And so that's where the hub comes in to help demonstrate how well these chemistries could work for their scenarios. So for this 2-year grant, this was supposed to have started last year, but it got put off for a year or so. But we're in the beginning stages right now where we're doing the outreach to talk about what the program is, what the project is. And then this winter, hopefully we're going to start doing a little more training around the project, collecting materials for the testing we're talking about. We're also going to have chemistry, benchtop equipment, be able to do some preliminary testing. And hopefully by the summer of next year, we'll have the full size equipment and operational, and being able to do testing for companies and develop those case studies around that. And we're hoping during the second year that we can also reach out beyond just New England and include other entities across the country as well. So this is not just designed to be a hub for New England. It's eventually to be used across the country as well. So like I said, expand beyond Massachusetts. Initially, we're partnering with a minimum of three pollution prevention agencies in New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And hopefully we're working with at least 3 companies in each of those states. And this is to basically promote that you can find alternatives to the halogenated solvents that are out there. So will this work for you? And you're not sure if it will. You want to hear from your peer before deciding. Well, the good news is we have someone from New Method Plating here to talk about this. So by the end of his talk about it, it won't be, will this work for you? It will be, this will work for you. With that, so a little bit about New Method Plating. They received a grant from us last year to help offset some of the costs of the purchasing of the equipment. And in return, they're working with us to showcase their success of the system. And coming in the fall, we're going to have a little more time to talk about what Nick has been doing with New Method Plating, and hopefully have scheduled a demonstration site where companies can come on site and bring parts and actually run it through the system to see it firsthand. So with that, I will turn it over to Nick.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jason. And Pam, thank you for having me to speak a little bit. Before the webinar got started, I was telling Jason and Pam and everybody else that we are about 4 weeks online with our new machine. So we are really just getting our feet wet with the whole thing and kind of getting an understanding of how well the system is working. And it is working very well. That was our knee-jerk reaction. This is great. And it is. I know a couple touch base, but a few points on what Jason had to say. We had been using TCE for a very long time, in excess of about 40 to 50 years. And it's a great product. We were very reluctant to switch because of product changes. So when something works, why change it? Obviously, we know there's health effects, and it is on the going to be banned. So there's a couple different options that we had started doing. There's 2 different options. You can either go to a chemical supplier or equipment supplier. And for us, we had 24-year-old aging equipment. We had to make a equipment upgrade, and we knew we had to make a chemical upgrade. So we were in that position to do either one first. As this is becoming more online and people are starting to do this more and more, the chemical suppliers can give you, lists of suppliers for equipment, and the equipment manufacturers can give you lists of chemical suppliers. They are somewhat working interchangeably to kind of help you out and point you in the right direction. I actually started working with Chemistries first. They gave me a list of companies that they've worked with for equipment. And that's basically how I ended up where I was at with the equipment that I ended up purchasing. So there is help out there. With there being a lot of these machines online, I was able to go just in Boston area, go to a customer that had the piece of equipment I was interested in, bring my parts. They ran them through the machine, answered a lot of questions. I was looking at another distributor. I went to their plant. I brought my parts in. They ran them through. It really comes down as far as the equipment, what works best for your plant, size, cost, quality, how it's made, how it's put together. It was a big decision. It's kind of like buying a vehicle. You got to look at it. You got to kind of get in, think, is this going to be the right purchase? I know my specific manufacturer was able to adjust the height of my machine to get it in my building. We have a height restriction. They actually altered the height of the machine, made customizing to get the machine in my building, which was great. The chemical suppliers as well, they actually sent me in a small benchtop size test unit. They shipped it into me. I did a little small size testing, but still it was testing to figure out what chemistries are going to work. So there is availability out there for help. And of course, TURI, we had sent some products in. You guys had done some bench testing as well, just to see, are we even going to remotely touch the quality of TCE product, and it is there. It works very well. We have yet to see any issues with quality. It has been working very well. Again, we are only 4 weeks into it, so I hope that by time the November project comes along, I have more information, still positive. But as of now, it's been going really well. So you can go to the next slide, Jason. Great, thank you. So Jason and everybody at TURI kind of asked me to throw some preliminary numbers together. The average costs, I had thrown some figures for oil and TCE mixed in, because that's obviously a byproduct of running a closed loop degreaser, was around $647. That's just costs. That's not including pickup fees, truck fees, all the other environmental aspects, costs that are associated every time a truck for hazardous waste removal comes to the building. Our old machine had carbon absorption system, which this new machine does not have. So that was around $720 a drum. So there is an exuberant cost there just for hazardous waste removal. Electricity seems to be a bigger cost savings than I had quickly done an analysis on it. One of the changes of the operating of TCE versus the alcohol, modified alcohol, the TCE degreaser would typically operate in a range of, say, 200 to 185 degrees. The modified alcohol runs at a much cooler, around 100 degrees, and that's a lower operating temperature, therefore requiring less steam electricity to get your baths up to proper operating temperatures. So that was actually a bigger cost savings than I realized when I started punching the numbers in. I said, wow, because I wasn't really considering the energy cost savings, but roughly done about a $4,000 a month. That's with a high pressure steam boiler and 2 machines, around $4,400 a month, which is pretty significant. Again, that was a high pressure steam boiler for the 180 degree to 200 on the old machines. The other benefit on this new machine, as it's more efficient, we replaced 1 machine to my 2 machines. Based on workload and based on the manufacturer, what they had projected are, per cycle times, we went with 1 machine. So that's already 2 less machines online, less maintenance, less headache when every time something decided to break on it, but and allowing me actually more floor space, which is great in a lot of buildings and industries in New England that are very tight in space. So we were able to save quite a bit of space, and we project to save quite a bit of money, around $38,000. Again, that's based on 5 days. We work roughly 10-hour days. Obviously, that is a variable based on workload and how many times we actually run the machine. There will be obviously a cost for oil removal. The machine, as Jason had put up in one of his slides, there is a byproduct, so that as the distillation completes, you have to drain that out. It boils all the alcohol solvent back into the machine. Then it will pump out your oil waste. We've done it once. We had a very little amount. It was in excess of maybe about 1 gallon, 2 gallons. And that obviously would have to be hauled off as hazardous waste. So I put a to be determined on that, because I don't have a cost of just oil removal. It's always been oil with try. I suspect it's going to be quite a bit less than the $640 per drum fee. No carbon needed on this machine anymore, which is great. So that cost is gone. And 1 machine, it's under 60 amps of power. So I put it about $1,200 a month. Again, same running time, average about 10-hour days. I do suspect this machine, we have noticed, because it is more efficient, it will be running less. And that's kind of like, we would have the machine work there, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, wow, we're at the end of the day. Now the machine's done early because we've already completed. So that's a benefit for our end as far as just keeping production moving. It's also a benefit for being able to shut the machine off sooner for us, which is great. If you want to click to the next slide, Jason. So on the right-hand side of that was our older machine. I kind of touched base. It was 24 years old. It was, I think the term vacuum degreaser is kind of a loose term. It was more of a closed loop with the carbon absorption. The new machine is on the left, which is quite a bit. It's 6,600 pounds. It is a very, very, very big and solid machine. It was quite a task getting it in the building. But this machine, one of the changes is a genuine vacuum degreaser. There is an actual giant vacuum pump that it is allowing to pull all the oil, all the excess solvents out of the little drilled holes, all the corners and parts. It really is pulling all that solvent back into the machine for recovery. We've noticed a good improvement on those because we are a typical job shop. So we don't know what we're getting in. We get a lot of odd jobs. People will send work in with blind holes, fine threads, shavings. And we have noticed a great improvement on the quality of some stainless steel jobs that we do. We noticed that in the November production performance, I will show a little before and after pictures of some jobs that are considerably brighter and cleaner just on stainless, which was really a shock. But again, the quality seems to be coming out very well. And we seem to be doing a great recovery of the solvents. So that seems to be so far so good. So the machine operates basically in the same way as the one on the right. It has two baskets. The one on the machine was a 2 loading basket. The manufacturer actually adapted our machine to fit 2 baskets, the similar baskets. They were modified, so we're able to use our same part baskets, which is great. And so far so good. I don't remember, was that the end of the slide, Jason, or was there another? That was,
Yep,
okay. So that's kind of a quick down and dirty what I have being 4 or 5 weeks into this. It's been great so far. So I hope to have some more information as we go into the next couple of months.
Great. Yeah, we look forward to that. So if you're curious as to how it turns out, tune back in for November. So to wrap up real quickly, so we talked about the modified alcohols and the vacuum vapor degreasing systems. There may be some instances where this chemistry may not work for our situation. And so part of the grant we have, as I had mentioned, a bench scale vacuum vapor degreasing system, which you see here on the screen, which will allow us to investigate other chemistry compare alternatives. So azeotropes, which is blends of chemistries that are the same in solution as they are in the vapor phase. We also have co-solvents and bisolvents that we'll be looking into. So there's just kind of expanding what we'll be able to do for companies if the modified alcohols aren't the answer for them. So for the grant summary, we're looking to partner in EPA Region 1 to provide technical assistance and training around what we do for performance testing, looking to conduct research on alternatives for TCE and various applications, both the bench scale and in full scale cleaning operations. And we're hoping to address environmental concerns for communities that these companies are in and then showcasing what they've done to improve their surrounding neighborhoods. And with that, I will stop sharing. Pam, it's back to you.
Thank you, Jason and Nick, and thank you to all of our presenters. So I just want to wrap up really quickly, pointing out that with collaboration between researchers and industry, we can and we do find safer, effective, and affordable solutions to toxic chemicals. I want to really encourage people, if you are a company using a toxic chemical, to think about are there challenges that you've been facing that maybe you can speak with somebody here on TURI's research team to try to solve, because those safer alternatives do exist. So let's see, what do I want to do here? Where's my slide? Here we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, so you will be able to find all of the slides on the the link that Agnes shared earlier on in the chat. And so we encourage you to feel free to reach out to us. I wanted to also point out that we have a number of other webinars that will be happening between now and the end of this year. So on those slides, you'll have the link to those websites, excuse me, to the webinar, so that you can go ahead and register to join us at any one of these webinars if it is of interest to you. So we did have a couple of questions on the chat, and I just want to, I think, invite you to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Jeff Cohn, you had a question that I think was really relevant for Greg's presentation. Are you able to share, or do you want me to go ahead and read that out?
I'm here. I can talk.
Thank you. Go.
Hi. I guess the question was around influencing end users. So, you know, I understand that you're really doing interesting work all along the supply chain, working with manufacturers to develop new formulations, working with distributors. But I was intrigued with the distributor user interface in terms of using green labels, and whether there's room to work with green labeling organizations to influence end user decisions and maybe increase the linear feed of the product that's on the shelves.
So Greg, that's a good question for you.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple issues. One is like green label fatigue. Another issue is a lot of times like paint strippers, you want the stronger the better, because you want to remove the stuff as fast as you can. And for PVC cement, when you're making a bond, you want it to be very strong. You don't want to have to go back and redo that joint again. So sometimes when things say green or more environmental, there's a perception that it doesn't work as well or it's not as strong. So actually, Weldon, the company we're working with on the PVC cement, their products without the THF, they don't say anything. They don't say green, environmental, or anything. They're just keeping the same label as they had for their original product. It just says, you know, just reformulated, but doesn't. So that's a challenge when you say green. And I've had that experience with paint stripper manufacturers as well, that you put green, or a leaf or something on it, they just don't think it works as well, and they're not going to get it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, thanks. So we had another question for Gabrielle and Bahara about the water repellency that you talked about with the Hearts project. What was the PFAS-free chemistry based on?
What do you think, Bahari?
Um,
We have a patent pending.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have, yeah, it's non-fluorinated.
It's non-chlorinated?
Non-fluorinated, non-chlorinated.
Great, and bio-based. Okay, so patent pending, so we can't disclose at this point, but we did run the P2 Oasis analysis of it, and it is in fact safer. Right, great. And another question that Gabrielle, you actually had for Nick, which was about the possibility of reusing the oil through oil filtration. Is that something you've considered?
You know, that's a good question. One of the issues when we were setting up our system, when we talked with our supplier, they asked what type of oils. Again, repeating, being a job shop, we're not exactly sure what type of oils we're getting in the door. So they said, "Are you getting chlorinated solvents?" We said, I don't know. You know, it's very hard. Some of our products come in from overseas, some are from local manufacturers, and it's very hard to require them to tell us what's on here. So, be it that we don't know, it's a combination of very many different types of oils. No, I don't think we would typically. And like, for the most part, the amount of oil does not really amount to a lot for us because we are doing mostly surface prep, and it's mostly just milling oil and stuff like that. So the amount of oil, I don't expect us to be generating a lot of oil. We don't typically, but the good part is there's no chemicals going into the oil. It's going to be just oil. So yeah, good question, but I don't think we would. No, just because I don't know what it is.
Like it's too small of an amount, and you don't know
Yes.
what it is.
Yeah, it could be various different types of oil.
So it's not a lot of waste management either.
No,
Ah,
no, it's just
then
it's
maybe
very
it's not necessary.
very minute. The machine is programmed to basically to do an oil distill. You know, it's a cycle. You turn it on, and it drains into a pail, and we put it into our hazardous waste drum, and that's it. So it's very straightforward so far.
So real follow-up question on that, Nick. Do you
Yep.
have, like, after a month of doing this,
Mhm.
how much do you think you're going to produce in a year?
Well, in a year, so we had done a kind of an initial a still drain, kind of with the when they were setting up the unit. So we had kind of quickly done one, and I think I measured. I got about a gallon to a gallon and a half of solution. That was about 2-3 weeks in. So I will have to put the numbers based on by November. We're going to try to run that cycle. You know, a few weeks out and then do another cycle. And then based on how much work we're putting through it, figure out a flat line point that we can run that distillation so that we're only pulling out what we need to pull out of that machine. So we're not, you know, in excess. Hopefully there is no solvent. We don't believe there's any, but we're really trying to maintain that we're just, you know, removing the oils from the machine. I'm not expecting more than maybe a drum or two a year. I'm not even sure. And that's going to based on, I think, workload, you know.
So, and we'll have much better information come November
Yes,
at
a
the
couple
next
of months.
webinar where we'll talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
this in more detail.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really want to encourage people to stay abreast of the webinars that are coming up and feel free to join us. I want to thank all of our speakers. Lots of really great research going on, lots of opportunity to do more research. And I encourage anybody joining us here today to feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But with that, I'd like to let everybody go. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in September.